Day. Thanks again for joining me. My name is Dr. Ryan Shelton. I'm a functional medicine doctor for My Go-To Doc. I've been practicing functional medicine for 20 years. We've been posting a live stream every Tuesday for about a month now, introducing you to functional medicine, talking about food plans for functional medicine, addressing chronic inflammation, and looking at some of the many functional medicine laboratory testing that can be done as part of discovering your underlying root causes of disease and poor health. Today, we're going to be talking about inflammation. How important it is to address inflammation, some of the causes. I think embedded in part of the presentation is a case study that hopefully you find interesting. And then certainly if you have any questions at the end, I will be happy to try to get to all of them. And if I'm not able to this week, I can get to you next week as well. So again, my name is Dr. Ryan Shelton. I am with mygotodoc.com, and my primary role is a functional medicine physician. Now, inflammation certainly plays a role in long haul COVID, long COVID symptoms, even post vaccine symptoms. So it's important for those of you struggling out there that you pay attention to inflammation, because it puts you at much higher risk for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, depression, anxiety, obesity, joint pain, arthritis, autoimmune conditions, dementia, wrinkles, vision decline, hearing decline, and certainly fatigue and stress, immune disorders of all kinds, a depressed immune system, so that you're less likely to combat those nasty viruses and bacteria and parasites that we are intended to combat as a process of inflammation, but we'll get into that in a little bit. So just an outline of the presentation, we're going to be talking about the causes of inflammation and the obstacles that we kind of place on ourselves in terms of diet and lifestyle to help quell or quiet down that inflammation through lifestyle measures, dietary measures, and eating an anti-inflammatory diet. And I think there is actually a brief quiz at the end, so pay close attention so that you score 100% on the quiz. It's not a hard quiz as long as you pay close attention. You should ace it, no problem. So the case study. This was, oh gosh, maybe 8-9 months ago. He was a 54-year-old female insurance agent. He had high blood pressure. He was overweight. He had poor short-term memory. He could remember things in years past, but poor short-term memory, erectile dysfunction, and fatigue, low energy, brain fog. So we did some functional medicine lab tests on him. We looked at his ORAC score, so how much oxidation or antioxidation he had going on in the body. We looked at some genetic testing. We looked at some enzymes that should help to control inflammation, and that includes superoxide dismutase. So that's the SOD catalase, GST, which is an enzyme involving glutathione, which happens to be the second most antioxidant agent in the body. The first, surprisingly, is melatonin, that's sleep hormone, dopamine levels. We looked at the inflammatory state of his cells through looking at the levels of cytokines and different complement. So complement is a little bits and pieces of protein that spike inflammation. And we looked at his liver proteins, the C-reactive protein, homocysteine, lipoprotein A, and tumor necrosis factor. And wouldn't you know it, a lot of these showed that he had some pretty significant and pretty chronic inflammation going on. So we had to address those. By the way, there is a code over to the right of your screen or left of your screen, I forget. Put your phone up to it, click it. It takes us to our functional medicine website. It's free to do. It just gives you more information about what functional medicine is and who I am. So feel free to line that up on your phone and get free access to our website. So what is inflammation? it's war basically. So acute inflammation usually is a good thing. It's a danger or an alarm signal that the body uses, and it's triggered by infection or injury, and it mobilizes the troops to help fight off the invading viruses, bacteria, or initiate repair of damaged or injured tissue, if that's in the skin, in the joints, in the liver, in the brain, in the nerves, wherever that injury or damaged tissue is. Acute inflammation is meant to combat it. So acute inflammation you can kind of think of as the Marines. They're the first ones to arrive. Hopefully they put out the fires. But if and acute inflammation is defined by those symptoms: heat and pain and redness. Um, the pain, redness, and swelling that occur with inflammation isn't caused by the actual infection or injury or damage. It's caused by us. It's caused by our immune system trying to fight off the enemy. When an acute inflammatory response is triggered, chemical messengers are released throughout the body, systemically throughout the blood, to recruit more troops. It triggers more blood flow to the area, leakier blood through the vessels so that the Marines can get to where they need to go. Now, hopefully, the Marines can take care of the situation. However, when acute inflammation turns into chronic, then you're recruiting more ground troops. You're recruiting the entire military. And if that goes on for a long time, you get chronic inflammation and intractable war, basically. That's just a little more on the process of inflammation. We don't need to get into all the details. Basically, blood vessels get leaky, chemicals go to the tissue, white blood cells or the immune cells go to the tissue, and hopefully we can fight the problem without causing too much collateral damage, right, to civilians. We're targeting the enemy, trying to eliminate that problem without causing collateral damage. So chronic inflammation, it's the inflammatory response that doesn't solve the initial issue. But again, the initial issue, while still may be present, is mostly caused by us, is mostly caused by an overreactive immune system. And perhaps there are other things going on, like imbalanced hormones. Perhaps the liver is continuing to release pro-inflammatory chemicals throughout the body, pro chemicals to clot the blood, because we don't want that swelling, that leakiness of the blood vessels to continue. So acute inflammation tends to last, hopefully, days, maybe a few weeks. Chronic inflammation is a slow, long burning flame. And again, it can lead to chronic disease, autoimmune disease, cardiovascular, arthritis, mental problems, behavioral problems, mood issues. And so once chronic inflammation and the causes are identified, that's where a functional medicine doctor really steps in and identifies the root causes and hopefully tries to resolve them so that chronic inflammation starts to quiet down. So chronic inflammation can have many causes: failure of the immune system to clear the initial pathogen or injury or toxic substance, environmental toxic substance. It can be due to injury, infection, foods. Some common ones are listed: sugars, high sodium, gluten, lectins, partially hydrogenated fats, unhealthy fats, basically. Age products, which we covered last week, glycolated end products, environmental toxins, micronutrient deficiencies, changes in mood. So changes in levels of anxiety or depression can actually cause chronic inflammation, and that is a wheelhouse that just keeps on spinning. If your mood is beginning to become affected due to chronic infection or hormone imbalancing, if you're suffering from depression and anxiety, that mental state can actually also encourage further inflammation, chronic inflammation, to persist or continue. Stress, poor sleep, hormone imbalances, and prescription medications can cause chronic inflammation as well. So out there, raise your hand if any of this sounds familiar for you long haul COVID patients, for you post vaccine patients. A lot of this may sound familiar. Causes of chronic inflammation ultimately originate in the genes of the immune system, particularly in organelles called mitochondria, which suffer greatly from chronic inflammation. And without those mitochondria working efficiently, the state of chronic inflammation tends to persist. And it is a chain reaction. So, chronic inflammation causes many of these chronic diseases, but these chronic diseases just continue to feedback and allow chronic inflammation to persist from a variety of different organ systems. So, oxidation is certainly involved. One of the most insidious things about free radicals is that interacting with other molecules, they're trying to be stable. They just want to be stable. Don't we all want to be stable? So, they rip away electrons from healthy good cells in order to stabilize themselves. And then guess what? The healthy good cell suffers the negative consequences. Oxidation, it's like one compound or chemical being an aggressive sponge or vacuum sucking off electrons, causing oxidation and damage to perfectly healthy cells. You can think of it as jello. If you put fresh jello out on the counter and leave it for a few days, it gets hard. It oxidizes. You can think the same goes with cheese. You can think of it as rust on a car. That process is actually oxidation, except now we have it going on inside of you. So things get stiffer, things slow down, things lose the function of what they're supposed to be doing, which is very problematic when it comes to systems throughout your body. If it's neurological systems, endocrine systems, immune systems. So reactive oxygenated species, they're a byproduct from normal metabolism when oxygen is utilized to produce energy, basically, in those mitochondria. But if that chain reaction is hyperactive, mitochondrial get damaged, cells get damaged, immune systems suffer, and organ systems suffer. So it is a necessary evil of all life. All living organisms go through an oxidation process because they live. They have to breathe, and this process of respiration causes oxidation. And the key is to limit it to just that and not have it become hyperactive. And again, just a long list of chronic diseases. It should last a fraction of seconds, but if it lasts weeks, months, and years, then we're talking about diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, cancer, aging, brain disease, erectile dysfunction, hair loss, vision, hearing, cell death, gene damage. The list goes on and on. So, 9.5 out of 10 scientists and physicians will agree that almost all chronic disease and symptoms of chronic disease is due to chronic inflammation. So we really need to get that under control. Now, what can we do about it? Those are the causes. What can we do about it? Well, it starts with kind of a mind-body connection. So getting therapeutic exercise or movement, examples here I listed are Tai Chi, yoga, and Qigong, and getting adequate sleep, 7 to 9 hours every night. That's when we repair. That's when we rejuvenate, right? During the day, we're active, we're working, we're stressed out. But we repair, hopefully, through getting solid, restful sleep. So make sure that you're getting sleep. Stress, we got to think about what you wear in your tool belt to address stress. We're all under stress, right? We're not living in the jungle anymore or in the forest anymore where stress is being chased by a bear. We get away from the bear and we're happy. Nope. We go to work every day, 5 days a week. We have maybe toxic relationships with our bosses or family members. We have deadlines to meet. We drive in traffic. We're stressed out chronically. And so, what is in your stress tool belt that you can help counter a stressful lifestyle? I listed some here: meditation, deep breathing technique, yawning, laughter, dancing, sex, journaling. All of these stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system instead of the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic, fight or flight. Parasympathetic is relaxation, breathe, and calm things down. And emotions play a huge role, either high emotions and a high state of anxiety or lower emotion and depressed mood. Those contribute to high levels of stress and high levels of inflammation. So, understanding root causes of imbalances of emotions. Imbalances of hormones are a big player in chronic inflammation. So that could be adrenal hormones like cortisol, DHEA. It could be sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. It could be thyroid hormone. It could be some brain hormones like melatonin, epinephrine, norepinephrine. So, understanding where your balance is in hormones is very important when it comes to addressing chronic inflammation. I love contrast hydrotherapy. For those of you not familiar, it's basically taking a hot shower and ending on cold. Oh, I know it's scary, but you just need 30 or 60 seconds of that cold. And it stimulates parasympathetic quite dramatically. Or you can do cold plunge immersions for those of you out there that are even braver. And then a few types of light, like infrared, red lighting, just a few centimeters away from the skin, can be helpful as well. I'm going to take a break from the presentation for just a moment, see if any questions have come in. Let's see, where am I at? Is there a specific lab test just for chronic inflammation? There's not one, unfortunately, because all of these cytokines, because of these pro-inflammatory chemicals, are quite varied based on, okay, are they being released by the immune system? Are they being released by the liver? Are they being released by the local tissue that's being affected? There's not, unfortunately, just one test. There are some screening tests that can be run to see what the state of general inflammation is, but we can't really get to the state of chronic inflammation through one simple test. Good examples would be C-reactive protein, homocysteine, fibrinogen. There are several others, but when it comes to determining chronic inflammation, I like to cast a wide net to see, okay, what kind of inflammation is going on? Is it particular to the immune system? Is the liver having problems? Is it a localized tissue? So I like to cast a wide net to understand the full inflammatory picture, if that makes sense. We'll do one more question and then we'll get back to the presentation. Could this inflammation cause my brain fog? Absolutely. And it's likely the cause of brain fog. It could be due to imbalanced hormones. But again, imbalanced hormones can set the stage or allow to have chronic inflammation persist. Wonder how that affects the brain. In general, the chronic inflammation causes changes in neurotransmitter levels, in the neuroplasticity of the brain, or how well the brain is communicating with itself, and imbalances in hormones. So, not to mention headaches. Yes, so headaches and chronic inflammation are certainly correlated with one another. Doctor prescribed gabapentin. Will it help? Possibly. I've seen gabapentin be more effective for true migraines than, say, chronic inflammatory headaches or stress headaches. So if you're suffering from migraines, it's possible that gabapentin would help. But generalized inflammatory or stress-induced headaches, the gabapentin will not likely touch that in terms of what I've seen, at least. All right, onward and forward. So basic diet ratios are typically askewed in the SAD, or Standard American Diet. Too much sodium, not enough potassium. So reduce processed foods and prepared foods. They're typically quite high in sodium. And eat more whole foods, dark leafy greens, veggies, fruit, beans, legumes, nuts, and seeds. The typical ratio in the US is 2 to 1. 2 sodium to 1 potassium. And that ratio should be totally flipped on its head, way in the direction of potassium. At least that's how we evolved, 1 to about 10 to 50 parts potassium. And then omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Right now, the standard American diet, the SAD diet, is about 15 omega-6 to 1 omega-3. That's not how we evolved. We evolved when it was much closer to 1 to 1. And research shows that even if we can get that ratio lowered to maybe 2 to 5 to 1 part omega-3, we see consistently in research a decrease in chronic inflammation. And of course, that is all about the quality and quantity and how you prepare fats and proteins. Because fats almost always accompany proteins. So we want to not cook fats at high temperatures because that destroys their potential positive value. And we want to avoid fats and proteins that are high in omega-6. And we want to really encourage foods that are high in omega-3 so that we can push that ratio much closer to how we have evolved. So generally, and we certainly touched on a lot of this last week, anti-inflammatory diet, consuming good fats, omega-3s, omega-9s, omega-7s, certainly fatty fish, mackerel, salmon, sardines, anchovies, herring, and nuts and seeds, walnuts, Brazil nuts, almonds, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, flax seeds, chia seeds. Anti-inflammatory diet also involves high intake of fruits, veggies, whole grains. Those are some of the vegetables and fruits that are higher in the anti-inflammatory properties. And colors. This is all about colors, right? It's the oranges and the reds and the purples and the blues. Uh, those are anti-inflammatory chemicals in plants, fruits, and veggies to protect themselves against environmental onslaught, uh, be it overexposure to sun or insects. We can use their protective chemicals to protect us as well. So lots of colors. I recommend 5 colors, 9 servings, fruits and veggies every day if you can hit that goal. And it's hard. It is hard as an adult. So what in general does an anti-inflammatory diet look like? It's a Mediterranean diet, a Nordic diet, a DASH diet, paleo diet, low consumption of processed meat, lower intakes of refined sugars and beverages in foods, refined grains, and a high consumption of fruits, veggies, fiber, legumes, nuts, seeds, and seafood, and eat the rainbow. Oh, it sounds like a Sesame Street episode, but yes, eat the rainbow. And secret weapons can be probiotics, eating foods that have been fermented or taking a good quality probiotic supplement. Polyphenols, those are the colors, so eating the rainbow. Culinary herbs and spices are so beneficial for decreasing inflammation. So the oregano, the basil, the turmeric, the ginger, the thyme, the list goes on and on. Anything that you use as a culinary herb or spice to flavor your food is not only doing wonders for making your food taste better, it's also decreasing inflammation in the body. Quantity certainly matters. Pressure cooking is a great way to prepare some foods. Slow and low temperature is a great way to prepare foods. And I've listed some sources of good quality soluble fiber as well. And yeah, the list of some of my favorite anti-inflammatory foods there: garlic, ginger, turmeric, probiotics, polyphenols, anthocyanidins, proanthocyanidins. These are colors. Catechins and epicatechins, those are highest in green tea and black tea. Indoles, so indoles are high in cruciferous vegetables. That's the broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage and Brussels sprouts and kale. Quercetin, um, actually high in the allium family. So allium is onions and leeks, garlic, berries of all types, grapes, cherries, acai tea. These are herbs, the boswellia and psyllabum. Psyllabum is milk thistle. It's a great anti-inflammatory. Don't forget about those seaweeds, the browns, the reds, the greens. Medicinal mushrooms have fantastic anti-inflammatory properties. Here we're talking lion's mane and reishi and shiitake and cordyceps, all great. Um, Tea, we talked about glutathione and NAC. So glutathione isn't, and unless it's prepared properly in the form that you're taking, the capsule that you're taking, and it can be to be stable throughout the digestive system and absorbed as such. You can certainly do IV glutathione, but NAC is an amino acid called N-acetylcysteine, NAC. And when you take NAC, it actually goes to the liver and it allows the liver to produce more glutathione, which is a tricky way of increasing glutathione. Again, a very powerful antioxidant, not just for your liver, but throughout the body. Listed some others: brassica, vitamin C, E, zinc, selenium, magnesium, alpha-lipoic acid. You can take those enzymes, superoxide dismutase and catalase, if you're low in them. And there's a trademarked product out there called Geranol. It's essential oil, lemongrass, and lavender, and it's been studied to decrease several of those laboratory parameters of inflammation. N-acetylcarnitine, carnitine is an amino acid. Saffron is an herb. The combination of B12 and folate. I do recommend that you take those together because if you take too much of one, it can deplete the other. Beta glucans as well. So beta glucans are actually found in whole grains. Oats, rolled oats are a fantastic source. Barley is a fantastic source. Brown rice is actually a good source as well. Excuse me. Let me go back, see if we have any more questions that have come in. Ringing in the ears, tinnitus. Yes, terrible. Keeps me from focusing at work. Could inflammation cause this after having COVID twice? Yes. The answer to that is quite simply yes. So we need to decrease inflammation. Actually, there are a couple of herbs that have been studied for tinnitus to increase the blood flow to the inner ear, which is likely where the tinnitus originates because of the inflammation that's going on there. So ginkgo biloba, ginseng, and actually a third, bacopa, holy basil. All of these have been utilized for the treatment of tinnitus or ringing of the ears. I'll get to another question here. Are red light sauna blankets helpful if you don't have access to a sauna? Yes, that's a simple answer. Is a sauna helpful for inflammation? Yes, that is a great question. Yes, so either infrared or just a hot steam sauna, both of them are helpful for inflammation. And the reason is that that will induce, hopefully, some sweating. And so the skin is the largest organ in your body, and it's one of the 5 emunctories or detox organs of the body. Of course, your liver is kind of number 1. It's the captain, it's the general in charge of controlling not only detoxification, but a lot of controlling inflammation. However, the skin is the largest organ in the body, and I've read dozens of studies that show if you're consistent about either red light sauna or hot steam sauna, you can reduce over time, and it takes months, but you can reduce over time environmental toxins, heavy metals, and reduce inflammation. So yes, I highly encourage sauna if you have access to one. Let's see. Optimal food pyramid. Let's see, how are we doing on time? Optimal food pyramid. I've talked about this. Eat the rainbow. Eat organic if you can to avoid those environmental toxins like pesticides. Eat to support blood sugar. So we want to make sure that we're not having spikes and valleys throughout the day. If you're diabetic, pre-diabetic, you have to be even more careful because then your hemoglobin A1C, your insulin will be only contributing to further exacerbate inflammatory processes. Do not overconsume animal foods. Most populations around the world, if you look at blue zones, those are the places on Earth that have the highest rate of longevity. So people there live longer. They have lower levels of chronic inflammation going on, and they typically either eat no red meat or they limit it to once, maybe twice a week. The rest of the animal products are either poultry or fish and seafood. Eat the right fats. We talked about the omega-6 to omega-3 ratios, sodium, potassium levels. Get that processed food out of your diet. Eat more whole, nutrient dense food. Food additives, food preservatives. Read labels. Don't eat things with labels. Eat whole foods, nutrient dense foods. And if you read an ingredient that you can't pronounce or don't know what it is, you probably shouldn't be consuming it. And then proper hydration, of course, is always important for overall health, but for stemming the chronic inflammatory process. Let's see. See if there's another question here. How about GI inflammation? Yeah, that's a great question. So, GI inflammation can come about from a number of different causes. It can be foods that you're eating, it could be environmental toxins that you're ingesting, it can be stress. Um, and we've seen it more and more with long haul COVID patients, not just COVID, but chronic infections, not just from the COVID virus or the coronavirus, but for chronic infections of bacteria, viruses, parasites that really cause confusion for the immune system monitoring the mucous membranes of your GI tract. And that's another topic for another day. Probably not next week, but maybe 2 weeks from now, we can do just GI inflammation. Yeah, so GI inflammation, it causes GI symptoms: gas, bloating, loose bowels, constipation, heartburn, um, abdominal pain. It can cause GI symptoms, but even worse than that, a lot of your immune system is right there. It's right there in your GI tract, monitoring the interface between the outside world and your inside world. Because really, the GI tract is just a tube, right? It starts here, it ends at the other end, but it's a closed system that hopefully very selectively allows only certain specific good substances through to your inside, right? Your GI tract isn't your inside, it's just a tube, closed system that allows um, nutrients, macro and micronutrients, to be absorbed. And with GI inflammation, what you get is swelling of the GI tract. So those tight junctions swell up, just like a swollen ankle if you sprain your ankle. And now all of a sudden, those tight junctions that should only be selectively allowing nutrients and compounds in, now you've opened the floodgates, and the immune system says, whoa, 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 slow down. I can't take it. They start producing cytokines and chemicals. Then your liver says, oh my gosh, we've got a full body problem. And so GI inflammation suddenly leads to anxiety, depression, brain fog, numbness and tingling in the hands and feet, poor skin health, hair loss, hormone imbalances. So a lot of health starts in the gut. And if that's a place to start when it comes to treating inflammation. Um, Here's a question. Does IV ozone therapy treat inflammation? To be honest with you, I don't have much personal professional experience with IV ozone therapy. I know practitioners that have good success with it, but I don't personally use it. I never have. Again, some colleagues of mine use it. I think other IV therapies can more prominently stand out to decrease inflammation. Glutathione is spectacular. IV vitamin C is really good. There's a cocktail out there called Myers cocktail that can be really good as well. There's actually an IV formulated compound of milk thistle that works pretty well. when taken IV. So I don't personally use ozone therapy. I can't really be a strong advocate for it, but I'm certainly not an enemy of it. Here's a question. Does quercetin cause tinnitus? Tinnitus, again, is ringing in the ears. Not typically. However, we are all individuals. And I say not typically because uh, 95 individuals can take quercetin causing no side effects at all. But then you've got 5 people that take it and say, oh, well, it causes rashes behind my elbows, or it causes tinnitus, or it causes gas and bloating. So the vast majority of people taking quercetin do not suffer tinnitus as a side effect. In fact, some practitioners prescribe quercetin um, to help with tinnitus. So if you notice that quercetin and the tinnitus onset kind of together, you started taking quercetin, and yep, sure enough, the tinnitus started. That might be a clue, but in general, it shouldn't. Let's see. And you can read this about food and timing. Intermittent fasting can be quite helpful. So, excuse me, intermittent fasting can be quite useful. Ideally meats should take place within a window of about 11 to 12 hours, allowing plenty of time to digest them. And that will help to mitigate some of the spikes in insulin levels and blood pressure. There have been quite a few studies that show you should probably be eating meat, particularly red meat, kind of by itself, because there are studies that show eating meat with grains like hamburger, cheeseburger, have a compounding effect or a synergistic effect in raising insulin levels and your body's insulin response. Whereas eating red meat by itself doesn't have that shocking effect in the body. But your typical hamburger, cheeseburger, where you've got the meat and the grain or the bread, you get that body's exaggerated response. Lots of legumes, whole grains, veggies. We've talked about that. So-called blue zones, right? And what I've seen working with patients is most patients, they know this stuff. Either they've been told by a doctor, a functional medicine doctor, they've read it on Dr. Google online. They know this stuff about what a healthy diet is. It's not the information; it's the change in behavior change in behavior consistently that is more of a challenge, because of our work schedules, because of our life schedules, because maybe we don't know how to cook, maybe we don't know how to prepare food on our own, maybe we're so used to the ultra processed food that for the first few weeks or a month that we begin to eat whole foods, it just doesn't taste as good. It will eventually, and that's due to a process of neuroadaptation. Look, food manufacturers know more about how your brain craves foods than you know what you want to eat. They make and process foods in a way that make you buy it again and again and again. Um, and it's a process of neuroadaptation where once you're off of those foods, whole foods, nutrient dense foods, it takes a few weeks. And some patients, it may take a few months, but once you're able to make that transition, then you start craving the whole foods. Then you start craving the nutrient dense foods. It just takes a little bit of time for your body to adjust. And yeah, just a couple of points here. Intermittent fasting, of course, is good, whatever schedule you're on. If it's a 18-6 or a 24 or a 24-hour fast, we know that that can decrease inflammation. And one of the mechanisms, this is pretty cool. A few studies have come out. One of the mechanisms through which intermittent fasting helps is it increases a compound that your body produces called urolithin A. Urolithin A decreases inflammation. And guess what? There are some foods that also, by themselves, increase urolithin A. Strawberries, raspberries, walnuts, and pomegranate. Well, that's cool. Start eating more of that. And then nicotinamide mononucleotide, NMN, gets changed in your body to NAD plus. And if you take NMN with TMG, or um, trimethylated glycine, um, all three of those acronyms, the NMN and the NAD plus and the TMG, they are powerfully protective against oxidative damage to your mitochondria and oxidative damage to your DNA. And there are supplements out there of NMN coupled with TMG that studies have shown can decrease inflammatory states pretty consistently. Oh, let's see. Let me see if I can grab a couple more questions here. I don't have too much longer. I love the questions, everyone. Thank you. How to reset immune response due to mold toxicity. That, again, is another topic all by itself. And I'm happy to do that. Maybe in 3 or 4 weeks from now, let's talk about mold toxicity. That's a great topic. Mold toxicity is becoming more and more common just because the houses that we live in, the apartment buildings, the duplexes, our housing situation. Many of our houses were built, what, 30, 40, 80 years ago. And so you have this situation where mold has an opportunity to grow. And not just in our homes, but in our businesses, in our schools. And they can cause the mold itself, but some of the compounds that the molds release, mycotoxins, can contribute strongly to chronic states of inflammation. So that's not an easy topic to address right now because we've only got a few minutes left, but a great topic. And you're onto something if you're newly discovering mold toxicity, because it can be a huge contributor to chronic inflammation. Any specific probiotics for anti-inflammatory effects? Well, I always start with food as medicine. So fermented foods, whatever you like, if it's yogurt, kefir, kimchi, miso, sauerkraut, kefir. Kefir is like a liquid yogurt, but it's higher in probiotics. In terms of specific probiotics, the three at the top of my list would be lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, and Saccharomyces. And within each of those, lactobacillus, there are dozens, probably hundreds to choose from. Bifido, the same, dozens, if not hundreds. And then Saccharomyces, there's just a few. But I recommend a broad spectrum multi-strain probiotic containing at least a few lactobacillus species, at least a few bifidobacterium species, and then Saccharomyces is also a good one to include in that as well. And they're all great for anti-inflammatory effects. What proteins do you recommend if you don't like fish? I'm assuming shellfish as well, or you don't want to eat ketogenic. Well, so here we're talking about, further animal sources. We're talking what's left. Um, Beef, grass fed always, limit it to 1 to 2 days per week. Lamb is a decent source. Poultry are decent sources as well. And then we have proteins in the vegetarian kingdom as well. Beans and legumes, nuts and seeds are quite high in protein. Um, Vegetables, although vegetables are less than the examples just given, and you have to have higher quantities of vegetables. And then fruits certainly represent um, uh, the lowest of protein content, with the exception maybe of avocado. Avocado has a decent amount of protein in it. I hope I answered your question there. So let's get back to this case study. I'm going to have to wrap up here in a few minutes. I got to pick up my kid from school. So we made changes in his diet. Uh, he started eating an anti-inflammatory diet. He started deep breathing exercises and meditation. He found a meditation app for his phone, 15 minutes a day. He started doing Tai Chi about 10 minutes a day. Um, we placed him on some anti-inflammatory herbs, and we placed him on some anti-inflammatory micronutrients, and he was given Myers cocktail. Let's see, he was once a week for 2 months, and he felt better subjectively. I think this was about a 4-month follow-up. Subjective and objective improvements. Again, this was the insurgent agent, high blood pressure, overweight, poor memory. Blood pressure went down. He lost about 25 pounds. His memory improved. He started getting nighttime erections. He could be intimate with his wife without pharmaceutical help, and his energy went up. And those labs also improved. We saw improvements in C-reactive protein, homocysteine, lipo-A, tumor necrosis factor, SOD and catalase improved, cell cytokines and complement levels decreased, and so both subjective and objective improvements were seen in him, although it did take a few months, so none of these are quick fixes. So not only are we helping people feel better, but we're seeing improvements in those functional labs as well. So yeah, just the two general ratios. Remember the sodium. Oh, this is the quiz, right? The two general ratios. It's the sodium potassium, and then omega-3 to omega-6, and then eat the rainbow. What's the best, simplest advice you can do to decrease inflammation? Eat the rainbow. Eat healthy fats. So look us up at mygoto.com. Tell your friends about us. Check out our social media channels rather. We will be here same time, same place. I didn't get to all your questions. I'm sorry. Same time, same place. We can perhaps kind of copy and paste some of the questions that we didn't get to this week. So tune in next week and we can get to your questions. And then I think next week the topic is functional medicine, kind of more specific to long haul COVID or post-vaccine reaction, post-COVID vaccine reaction, as it is with functional medicine, and how the two really match up quite well together. And then we can try to copy and paste the remaining questions. And again, I do apologize that we weren't able to get to today, and then we can address them next week. So make sure that you tune in same time next week. Again, scan that little code to the right of your screen and it'll take you to our page. No cost. You just learn more about us and what it is that we do. So I thank you for your time very much. Hopefully you learned something. And that's the whole point of this, because if we're not learning collectively, then what's the point? So have a great week. Thank you again, and see you next time.